The clock was nearing midnight when Martha finally said goodbye to her colleagues and made her way to the elevator. The Central Hospital parking lot was almost empty at that hour, with only a few on-call doctors' vehicles scattered around the vast space. Her eyes burned with fatigue after 16 consecutive hours of work. Another extended shift, another day avoiding going home. At 65, Martha Sullivan was one of the most respected cardiologists in the hospital. Decades of experience and hundreds of saved lives had built her reputation. But in the past 6 months, since her husband Roger's departure, she had become a shadow of her former self. The work that was once a vocation now served as a shield against the deafening silence of her apartment. As she walked towards her car, she suddenly felt dizzy. The parking lot lights seemed to spin around her. She tried to lean on a nearby pillar, but her legs gave way. The last thing she saw before losing consciousness was the moonlight, strangely bright, filtered through the passing clouds. "Dr. Martha, can you hear me?" The familiar voice of her colleague, Dr. Eleanor, brought her back into consciousness. Martha blinked several times, trying to recognize where she was. The white walls, the heart monitor beside her, the smell of antiseptic. She was in a bed at the very hospital where she had worked for over 30 years. "What happened?" she asked with a hoarse voice. "You had a collapse in the parking lot, extreme exhaustion, dehydration and high blood pressure. Your body is sending clear signals that you need to rest." Martha tried to get up, but Elena gently stopped her. "Don't even think about it. You'll be under observation for at least 48 hours. We've already called your children." The mention of her children made Martha feel a pang of guilt. Since Roger's funeral, she had gradually distanced herself from Lawrence, Audrey and her 5 grandchildren. The missed calls and cancelled Sunday lunches accumulated like stones on her chest. Hours later, Lawrence and Audrey entered the room. The eyes of both revealed a mix of concern and relief. "Mum, you can't keep going on like this," said Audrey, holding her wrinkled hand between hers. "You and Dad always talked about slowing down, enjoying life after decades of taking care of others. And now you're working yourself to death." "Work is all I have left," Martha replied with a choked voice. Lawrence, always the more pragmatic of the two, approached from the other side of the bed. "Mum, I respect your pain. We miss him every day too. But Dad would never approve of what you're doing to yourself." 3 days later, Martha was discharged with strict medical orders, minimum 3 months of work leave. The hospital director, who had worked with Martha and Roger for decades, was adamant. She needed to face her grief or she wouldn't be able to return. The apartment on the 10th floor of the building had never seemed so oppressive. Strategically located 10 minutes from the hospital, it had been the couple's home for almost 20 years. Every corner held memories of a shared life. Martha dragged herself down the hallway to the master bedroom. The right side of the bed remained untouched, Roger's pillows still in the position he preferred. His scent had vanished from the sheets months ago, but Martha could still feel it in her memory, a mix of aftershave lotion and the smell of the old books he loved. In an attempt to occupy her mind, she opened the windows, letting the autumn breeze circulate through the space. The noise of the city entered with the wind, honking horns, distant conversations, the constant hum of a metropolis that never rests. The following morning, after a restless night of sleep, Martha made a difficult decision. It was time to face Roger's wardrobe. Her daughter Audrey had suggested this weeks after the funeral, but Martha hadn't been able to gather the strength. Carefully, she opened the oak wardrobe doors. The perfectly ironed dress shirts, the precisely folded sweaters, the aligned shoes, everything exactly as Roger had left it. He had always been meticulous with his belongings, a characteristic that contrasted with the organized chaos Martha maintained on her own side of the wardrobe. She began sorting the items into piles, on one side what would be donated, and on the other what would be kept as a memento. Each item carried a memory, a flash of shared moments. The navy blue tie he wore at Lawrence's wedding, the wool sweater he bought during that trip to Scotland, where they spent a week in an isolated cabin watching the starry sky. When she reached the brown coat, Martha paused. It was Roger's favourite, a tweed coat he wore on practically all special occasions during the fall and winter. A gift from Martha on their 20th wedding anniversary, the coat had aged like fine wine. Each wear mark told a story. Holding the coat against her chest, Martha allowed herself, for the first time in weeks, to cry openly. Deep sobs shook her body as the faint scent of Roger, still embedded in the fabric, evoked a flood of memories. When she finally calmed down, she noticed something strange in the inner pocket. She slid her hand in and found a small brass key, along with a folded piece of paper. On the paper, written in Roger's distinctive handwriting, Acacia Street, 278. Martha sat on the edge of the bed, confused. She didn't recognize the address, and the key didn't look like any they owned. Then, like lightning, the memory hit her. On the morning of the day Roger passed away, he had called her at the hospital, his voice brimming with enthusiasm. "I have a surprise for you, my love. Something we've been talking about for years. I can't wait to show you when you get home." These were the last words she heard from him. When she got home that night, she found Roger collapsed in the kitchen. The massive heart attack gave him no chance. The mentioned surprise was forgotten amidst the tragedy, until now. Martha spent the evening researching the address. It was in a quiet residential neighbourhood, about 40 minutes from downtown, an area known for its large properties, many of them with extensive gardens and well-preserved older buildings. The next morning she dressed with more care than in recent months. She chose a light blue blouse that Roger always said matched her eyes. She applied a light lipstick and combed her grey hair, which she usually wore in a severe bun. The car's GPS guided her hands on the steering wheel, while her mind wandered among possibilities. What could Roger have planned at that address? Knowing him, it could be anything, from a reservation at an exclusive restaurant to tickets for a concert. Roger was always an incurable romantic, planning surprises even after decades of marriage. As she moved away from the centre, the tall buildings gave way to increasingly spaced residences. The streets became tree-lined, the air seemed cleaner, the pace slower, a completely different world from the urban environment she was accustomed to. As she turned onto Acacia Street, Martha was immediately enchanted by the beauty of the place. Large trees formed a natural tunnel over the road, their golden autumn leaves creating a spectacle of colours. The houses, set apart from each other by extensive gardens, conveyed a sense of tranquility that Martha had forgotten existed. The GPS announced that she had arrived at her destination. Martha parked in front of a 2-story house with a wide porch that wrapped all the way around it. The garden, although slightly neglected, displayed a profusion of flowers: old roses, hydrangeas in shades of blue and purple, and camellias in bud promising an explosion of colours for the spring. A path of natural stones wound between flower beds to the main entrance, flanked by small solar lanterns. The house itself looked like something out of a storybook. Walls of a soft yellow, generous windows with white frames, and a dark wooden front door with stained glass details. On the porch, an old wooden swing moved gently in the breeze. With her heart racing, Martha approached the door. The key fit perfectly into the lock. As she turned it, she heard the familiar click of a door opening to reveal its secrets. The interior was dimly lit, with beams of light entering through the cracks in the closed curtains. Martha groped the wall in search of a switch. When the light flooded the room, she had to hold her breath. The living room was spacious and cosy, with wooden floors and a natural stone fireplace on one of the walls. The furniture was sparse, just a sofa covered with a white sheet, a few chairs, and a coffee table. In the centre of the solid oak dining table, a bouquet of flowers, now dried and faded, rested in a crystal vase. Beside it, a brown envelope with the letterhead of a local real estate agency. Martha opened it with trembling fingers. Inside, she found the house deed, registered in the name of Roger Sullivan, dated 3 weeks before his death. Alongside it was a handwritten note. "Dear Mr. Sullivan, as requested, the flowers have been placed on the table for the surprise reveal to your wife. The keys are with you, and the house is ready to be occupied." We appreciate your trust and wish you much happiness in your new home." Martha let herself fall into a nearby chair, tears blurring her vision. This was the surprise. The house with a garden they had always dreamed of for retirement, away from the noise and hustle of the city, yet close enough to visit their grandchildren regularly. The place where they planned to grow old together, cultivating flowers and memories. "What do I do now, Roger?" she whispered to the emptiness. "How can I live here without you?" As if in response, a ray of sunlight streamed through the window, illuminating a small photo album on the mantelpiece that she hadn't noticed before. She approached and opened it. On the first page, a photo of them young, on their graduation day from medical school. On the last page, a recent picture taken on Roger's 70th birthday, surrounded by their children and grandchildren. Among the pages, she found a sealed letter with her name in Roger's handwriting. With trembling hands, she opened it. "My dear Martha, we are finally here, in our dream house. I spent months looking for the perfect place for us to begin the next chapter of our lives. Remember when we used to take car rides on Sundays, and you always sighed as we passed through this neighborhood? One day, you would say. Well, that day has arrived. I know that working has always been a fundamental part of who you are, just as it was for me. But after decades of taking care of others, perhaps it's time to allow life to take care of us a little. I imagine the two of us on this porch watching the sunset. You with a book on your lap, me scribbling those amateur poems you pretend to like. The grandchildren running through the garden during the summers, while Lawrence tries to master the grill and Audrey tells us about her latest art exhibition. Life is too short to postpone happiness, my love. I know you will agree when you see this place with your own eyes. With all my love today and always, Roger." Martha stayed in the house the entire day, walking through each room, imagining the life they could have shared there. Upstairs, she found 3 bedrooms, one that would be theirs, and 2 prepared to welcome the grandchildren. In the basement, Roger had started setting up a small woodworking studio, his newly discovered hobby. At dusk, she sat on the porch swing, watching the sun set behind the trees at the back of the property. There, away from the noise of the city, she could hear the birds singing and feel the breeze caressing her face. At that moment, she made her decision. 3 weeks later, the apartment downtown was empty, her belongings packed and moved to the dream house, the house Roger had prepared for them. The children, initially surprised by the sudden decision, soon understood and supported the move. Martha transformed the 3rd bedroom into a small office, where she volunteered a few times a week. She didn't completely abandon medicine, but she rediscovered the balance she had lost. The gardens were gradually restored, with the help of a local gardener who taught Martha the secrets of cultivation. Her hands, once accustomed to surgical precision, now learned the delicacy needed to prune roses and transplant seedlings. On Sundays, the house was filled with life. Lawrence brought his wife and their 3 children. Audrey came with her husband and the twins. The dining table, once empty, now could barely accommodate everyone during the noisy and joyful meals. One spring afternoon, almost a year after finding the key in Roger's coat pocket, Martha was planting tulips along the driveway when Audrey approached. "You know, Mum, I was so worried about you after Dad was gone," she said, sitting on the grass next to Martha. "You seem to have given up on living too." Martha smiled, observing her dirt-stained hands, so different from the always immaculate hands she maintained during her career. "For a while I really gave up," she admitted. "But then Roger, even though he was no longer here, found a way to remind me that there was still life to be lived." That night, after everyone left, Martha sat again on the porch with a cup of tea. Roger's favourite tweed coat rested on her shoulders, now a comfort instead of a source of pain. "Thank you for the key, my love," she whispered to the stars beginning to appear in the sky. "Not just for this house, but for my new beginning." A gentle breeze passed, swaying the wind chimes she had hung on the porch, creating a delicate melody that seemed to say, "To everything there is a season, a time for every purpose under heaven." And Martha, at last, was ready for her new purpose. If you enjoyed the story, please leave a comment with a rating from 1 to 5 to show how much you liked it. Also, watch the video that is now appearing on your screen. See you soon.